Ancient mountains hold a whisper of something wild and alive. Have you ever stood on a high peak and felt a watchful presence in the wind, a silent guardian of the stone? That feeling echoes a belief held for millennia, the ancient Greek conviction that every mountain was home to a vibrant spirit. These were the Oreads, the powerful and often misunderstood nymphs of the cliffs and rocky heights. By the end of our journey, you will see these familiar landscapes through an entirely new, mythical lens. We will uncover why these spirits were both benevolent guides and dangerously vengeful, and unravel the tragic story of the Oread whose voice still haunts the mountains today. Which part of the wild, untamed earth feels most alive to you? They were the very soul of the stone, the Oreads. While the dryads animated the forests and the naiads gave life to the streams, the Oreads claimed the highest and most rugged domains. Their presence transformed a silent mountain from a mere pile of rock into a living, breathing entity. Think of them not as ghosts haunting the peaks, but as the mountain's conscious will, its personality made manifest. These spirits were almost always envisioned as breathtakingly beautiful, eternally youthful maidens, a stark and deliberate contrast to their wild and often harsh homes. This duality is the very core of their nature. They could be benevolent guides, leading a lost shepherd to safety through a sudden break in the fog, or offering a cool, hidden spring to a weary traveler. Their laughter might echo in the wind, a sound of pure, untamed joy. Yet to disrespect their home was to awaken a terrifying fury. The same spirit who might gently guide you could also call down a landslide upon you for defiling a sacred cave or arrogantly carving your name into the ancient rock. They embodied the mountain's two faces, the generous, life-giving sun on the slopes and the deadly, unforgiving storm at the summit. So the next time you feel a sudden, inexplicable chill on a mountain path or hear a whisper in the high air, remember the Oreads. It was their profound connection to the wild earth that made them both protectors and avengers. To understand an Oread is to see one branch of a vast, living family tree of nature. They were far from alone in their watch over the wild world. The Greeks saw divinity in every element, from the deepest ocean trench to the smallest grove of trees. The Oreads belonged to the great tribe of nymphs, countless spirits who were the daughters of primordial forces. Most often, they were considered the children of Gaia, the earth herself, born directly from the stone and soil of the mountains they inhabited. This made them ancient, their lineage stretching back to the very dawn of creation, long before the Olympian gods built their palaces on high. While they were not all-powerful like Zeus or Hera, they held a respected place in the divine order. The great gods might command the sky or the seas, but they often relied on these local spirits for knowledge of their domains. A god traveling through a mountain pass would pay respects to its Oread, for she knew every secret of the cliffs and caves. This relationship was one of mutual, if sometimes tense, respect. What truly defined an Oread, setting her apart from her countless sisters, was her specific, unbreakable bond with the high places. A dryad was tied to her individual tree, her life force intertwined with its roots. A naiad was the soul of a single spring or stream, unable to wander far from its flowing water. But an Oread, her spirit was woven into the entire massif, the towering peak, the vast expanse of rugged wilderness. She was not just in the mountain. She was the mountain, her consciousness as expansive and enduring as the stone itself. This grand, untamable domain shaped her into a more powerful and often more solitary guardian than her kin in the gentler landscapes below. Their very name, Oread, is a direct echo of the land they rule. It flows from the ancient Greek word oros, which simply means mountain. This is not a complex or hidden meaning. It is a declaration. An Oread is a mountain, and the mountain is the Oread. Their identity is forged from the substance of their home, a perfect linguistic mirror to their elemental nature. This direct naming tells us something profound about how the ancient Greeks perceived the world. They did not see spirits as separate entities visiting a place. They saw the spirit as the place itself, its living, breathing personality. So when a traveler spoke the word Oread, they were not just naming a type of nymph. They were acknowledging the conscious soul of the cliffs before them. Every time the name was whispered on the wind, it reinforced that unbreakable bond between the spirit and the stone. This deep, inherent connection shaped their entire existence. While a river nymph might follow her flowing waters downstream, an Oread's world was one of permanence and vertical grandeur. Her domain was the impassable ravine, the lonely summit that scrapes the sky, the hidden cave that echoes with a deep, ancient silence. Her name, born from the word for mountain, destined her to be as enduring, as formidable, and as untamable as the earth's very bones. Can you hear that truth in the name itself, Oread? It sounds like the wind over high rocks, a name that could only belong to the heights. Their presence first echoes across the pages of our oldest stories. In the stark, warrior world of Homer's Iliad, the mountain nymphs are called upon in a moment of profound transition. As the goddess Hera speeds across the sky from Olympus to the distant Mount Ida, the poet tells us she did not touch the ground. Instead, she stepped on the peaks of the mountains, and it is the Oreads themselves who become her path. They are the sacred high places, the trusted stepping stones for a queen of the gods. This is not a casual mention. It establishes them as foundational pillars of the world, respected and essential enough to bear the weight of divinity. Their role is quiet but profound. They are the known and named landmarks in a vast, wild landscape, the fixed points that even the gods acknowledge. Later, in the wandering epic of the Odyssey, their presence shifts to one of raw, elemental power. When Odysseus, the man of many turns, is tossed by a terrible storm, he fears being lost in a place without memory. He prays to the rivers, and the text tells us he prays to the nymphs, including those of the rugged places. In his moment of utmost peril, facing the formless chaos of the sea, he calls out to the spirits of the stable, unyielding land. The Oreads represent order. They are the promise of solid ground, the everlasting hills that offer a bearing to the lost. They are minor figures in the grand drama of gods and heroes, yet Homer grants them a crucial place in the cosmic order. They are the divine in the local, the silent, powerful witnesses to every human struggle played out against the backdrop of their eternal stone. Yet long before Homer's heroes walked the earth, the very first Oreads were stirring in the darkness of creation itself. Our earliest and most complete glimpse into their cosmic origin comes from the poet Hesiod in his foundational work, the Theogony. This is not a story of gods on a mountain, but of the mountain's own spirit being born. Hesiod tells us that the vast tribe of nymphs, including the Oreads, were born directly from Gaia, the earth herself. They did not simply appear, they were birthed from the primal rock and soil, the first conscious children of the living world. This makes them primordial entities, their existence stretching back to a time before Zeus, before Olympus, before the very ordering of the cosmos. They are as ancient as the hills because they are the hills awakened. Can you grasp the weight of that? These spirits are not minor decorations in a divine pantheon. They are the original inhabitants of a raw, newborn world, the first voices to answer the wind. Their age grants them a unique authority. While the Olympian gods represent a later, more structured order of power, the Oreads embody the wild, untamed essence of the planet itself. They remember when the world was still taking shape, and their connection to Gaia is not one of worship but of direct lineage. They are fragments of the Earth Mother's own consciousness, set to watch over her most majestic and enduring features. So the next time you hear a whisper of an Oread, know that you are hearing an echo from the very dawn of time, a voice that has known the silence before history began. But this ancient primal power was also capable of a profound and deeply human sorrow. Of all the Oreads, none embodies this tragic vulnerability more than the spirit named Echo. Her story begins not with a whisper, but with a voice of captivating beauty, a gift she used with cleverness and delight. This mountain nymph served as a companion to the great goddess Hera, and it was in this role that her first tragedy unfolded. Echo possessed a unique talent for conversation. She could weave stories and talk for hours, a skill she used to distract Hera while Zeus, the king of the gods, pursued his fleeting affairs among the other nymphs. For a time, this deception worked, but Hera was no fool. When she finally discovered Echo's clever ruse, her wrath was swift and terrible. The goddess did not strike Echo down. Instead, she cursed the very essence of the Oreads being, her voice. From that moment on, Echo could no longer speak her own mind or form her own words. She was condemned only to repeat the last few words spoken by others, a prisoner inside her own voice. Can you fathom the torment for a spirit whose very nature was conversation and song? The vibrant, witty Oread was reduced to a mere reflection of sound, her own thoughts and feelings forever trapped in a silent scream within. This was a punishment perfectly designed to isolate her from the world she loved, a cruel fate for a creature of connection. Her story, however, was only half complete, and a far deeper heartbreak still awaited her on the mountain paths. It was there she encountered the stunningly beautiful youth Narcissus. The moment she saw him, a desperate, hopeless love seized her wounded heart. But how could she express it? She could not call out his name. She could not whisper words of affection. She could only follow him, a silent, lovesick shadow through the woods. Then, one day, Narcissus became separated from his companions. He called out, "Is anyone here?" From the trees, Echo's voice echoed back, "Here." He called, "Come," and a voice answered, "Come." He shouted, "Let us meet," and she repeated, full of desperate hope, "Let us meet." She rushed from her hiding place, arms open, but when Narcissus saw her, he recoiled in disgust. He spurned her, mocking the spirit who could only mimic his words. His rejection shattered what little remained of her spirit. Humiliated and heartbroken, Echo fled into the deepest, most remote parts of the mountains. There she wasted away. Her body, fed on nothing but grief and unrequited love, slowly faded until it dissolved completely into the stone. But the curse of Hera was stronger than death itself. Her voice could not perish. It remained imprinted on the very substance of her home. And so the Oread Echo ceased to be, but her voice lives on, forever haunting the cliffs and canyons, repeating the words of every traveler who passes through her domain. She is the original, tragic source of every answering call you hear in the high, lonely places, a permanent reminder of love's cruel power. Echo's voice still whispers from the stone, a permanent scar of sorrow on the mountain's face. But other Oreads played a role in an even more intricate and chilling human tragedy. Far from the lonely cliffs where Echo faded, on the wooded slopes of Mount Cithaeron, lived a group of nymphs whose gentle care would set the stage for one of mythology's most devastating destinies. These were the Cithaeonian nymphs. Their story is woven into the life of Oedipus, the king fated to kill his father and marry his mother. When his parents, King Laius and Queen Jocasta, learned of this horrific prophecy, they pierced their infant son's ankles and ordered a shepherd to leave him exposed on Mount Cithaeron to die. This is where the Oreads entered the tale. The shepherd, overcome with pity, could not carry out the deadly order. Instead, he left the wounded baby in a secluded grove, a place sacred to the mountain nymphs. It was the Cithaeonian Oreads who found the helpless child. They did not turn away. These spirits of the wild, rugged earth became his unlikely nurses. They ensured he was found and taken to the childless king of Corinth, who would raise him as his own. Think of the profound irony in their actions. These embodiments of the mountain, a place often associated with harshness and isolation, performed an act of ultimate compassion. They saved a life, yet by saving the infant Oedipus, they unknowingly set in motion the very prophecy his parents had sought to avoid. Their nurturing kindness guaranteed the future tragedy. This is the deep, unsettling duality of the Oreads reflected in a new light. They were not being vengeful or cruel. They were simply acting according to their nature, protecting the innocent life left in their domain. But in the complex web of fate, even a pure act of mercy can have catastrophic consequences. The Ciceronian nymphs, through their benevolent care, became the first gentle push that started a king's long, terrible fall. Another Oreads tale reveals how peril could forge a goddess from a nymph. High in the Cretan mountains lived Britomartis, a radiant spirit and a devoted companion to the goddess Artemis. She was a huntress as untamed and swift as the mountain goat she pursued, her life defined by the crisp air of the high peaks and the sacred chase. Yet her existence was upended by the relentless pursuit of King Minos, the powerful ruler of Crete. For 9 long months he hunted her, not as a hunter tracks prey, but with a dangerous, possessive desire. Britomartis fled, her intimate knowledge of the cliffs and crags her only shield. She darted through forests she knew like the back of her hand and hid in caves that had sheltered her for centuries. But even the vastness of her mountain home could not forever conceal her from a king's obsession. Eventually, she was cornered on a sheer precipice, the roaring sea churning far below. With Minos closing in, she faced a terrible choice: capture or a final, desperate leap. She chose the abyss, throwing herself from the cliff's edge into the unforgiving waves. But her story did not end in a watery grave. In that moment of ultimate sacrifice, the divine will of Artemis intervened. The goddess did not let her loyal follower perish. Instead, she transformed Britomartis, catching her in a fisherman's net, or in some tellings, causing the very nets themselves to save her. From that day forward, the mountain nymph Britomartis was reborn as the goddess Dictina, whose very name means Lady of the Nets. She became a guardian of fishermen and sailors, a divine protectress of those who cast their nets into the deep. Her journey blurs the very lines of mythology, a spirit of the stone who, through trauma and divine favor, ascended to become a power of the sea. Her evolution reminds us that these categories we create, nymph versus major deity, were often far more fluid to the ancient mind, shaped not by rigid hierarchies, but by the powerful, transformative currents of story and survival. The wild, untamed nature of the Oreads made them the perfect companions for a very specific Olympian goddess. Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt, the wilds, and the moon, did not walk her sacred paths alone. She presided over a sacred sisterhood, a divine retinue of nymphs who shared her fierce independence and love for the untouched wilderness, and who better to join her chase through the deepest woods and highest peaks than the Oreads themselves. These mountain spirits were not merely followers, they were her kindred spirits, a band of eternal huntresses who embodied the very principles Artemis held most dear. They roamed the rugged, trackless landscapes far from the ordered cities of men, their laughter echoing with the rush of the wind and the call of wild animals. As virginal beings, they mirrored Artemis' own choice to remain free from the dominion of marriage and the control of men, a radical concept in the ancient world. Their freedom was their power, and their alliance with the goddess was a pact of mutual respect. They served as her attendants, yes, but also as her scouts, her protectors, and her only true peers in a world of often interfering gods. Imagine the spectacle of this divine hunt thundering across a mountain ridge, Artemis leading the way with her silver bow, flanked by the Oreads who knew every secret path and hidden spring. Their bond was not one of servitude, but of a shared, sacred purpose, a celebration of the wild feminine power that reigned supreme in the Earth's most remote and beautiful corners. Yet for all their fierce independence, the Oreads were not always solitary figures on their lonely peaks. Their world was also one of music, dance, and chaotic celebration, often orchestrated by the most untamed god of all. Pan, the goat-legged god of the wild, was their natural companion and frequent leader. With his syrinx or panpipes in hand, he could summon the mountain nymphs from their hidden grottos and high meadows with a melody that was impossible to resist. This was not the formal music of Apollo's lyre. This was the raw, rhythmic pulse of the wilderness itself, a sound that stirred the very roots of the trees and called every wild thing to move. When Pan played, the Oreads would emerge, leaving their silent watch to join in ecstatic dances under the moon. They would whirl and leap across the mountain clearings, their footsteps a thunderous counterpoint to the reedy music, their laughter mingling with the shouts of satyrs and the rustling of leaves. In these moments, the mountain was not a place of stern guardianship, but a theater of pure, unbridled joy. Pan was their rustic conductor, the spirit who could unlock their playful, frenzied side. But this relationship had a darker, more complex edge, especially in the pastoral poetry that so loved to depict them. The same god who led their dances was also a relentless pursuer. The idyllic image of Pan chasing a fleet-footed Oread through the woods is a common theme, a mythic representation of the wild male principle pursuing the elusive spirit of the place. The nymphs, embodying the untamable landscape itself, would often flee his advances, transforming into trees, streams, or echoes to escape his grasp. This dynamic was not simply a story of harassment. It was a poetic metaphor for the interaction between the fertile, pervasive force of nature, which Pan represented, and the specific, localized soul of a natural feature, the Oread. His pursuit was the wind rustling the pines, the rain seeking the deep crevices in the rock, the overwhelming, life-giving, and sometimes threatening energy of the wild that constantly engages with the static beauty of the land. So while Pan's music brought the Oreads together in revelry, his desire also reminded them that even in their sacred domains, they were part of a larger, more chaotic and ever-active natural world. But the revelry of Pan was just a prelude to a far more potent and transformative madness. When Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and divine frenzy, marched into the mountains, the Oreads did not simply dance. They were utterly reborn. These serene guardians of the stone became the most feared and fervent members of his retinue, the Maenads. Their connection to the wild earth made them the perfect vessels for his power. Under his intoxicating influence, the mountain itself seemed to pulse with a new, chaotic rhythm. Their sacred rites were not gentle celebrations, they were raw, ecstatic abandon. They would leave their quiet posts, abandoning the silent cliffs to gather in torchlit throngs on the high slopes. Wreathed in ivy and fox skins, their hair flowing wildly, they would move to a music only they could hear, a percussion born from the god's own presence. Their dancing was not the playful leaps for Pan. This was a frantic, whirling frenzy, a complete surrender of the self to the divine power surging through them. In this state, they were no longer just spirits of the mountain. They became the mountain's unleashed, untamable fury. Their cries, known as the Oreads, would echo through the ravines, a sound so piercing it was said to shatter rock. With their bare hands, they could tear apart large animals, a practice called sparagmos, consuming the raw flesh in a sacred communion. This was not mere violence. It was a ritual act, a direct encounter with the raw, life and death force of nature that Dionysus represented. The same Oread who might guide a lost child by day could, by night, become a conduit for this overwhelming ecstatic power, showing that the line between benevolent guide and primal force was terrifyingly thin. Their participation in the Dionysian mysteries revealed the deepest, most volatile layer of their nature, the wild heart of the mountain that could not be contained or civilized. Their homes were as untamed and varied as the spirits themselves. An Oread did not live in a palace of marble and gold. Her sanctuary was the mountain, and within its vastness she claimed specific, secret places of profound power and beauty. Imagine a secluded cave, its entrance half hidden by cascading ivy and ancient ferns. Inside, the air is cool and smells of damp earth and stone. Sunlight filters through a crack in the ceiling, illuminating glistening mineral veins that streak the walls like frozen lightning. This was not a dark, fearsome den. It was a private chamber, a silent cathedral where the spirit could rest, her presence felt in the deep, resonant quiet. Or picture a hidden grotto, accessible only by a narrow path behind a thundering waterfall. Here, the world is veiled in a perpetual mist, the sound of crashing water a constant roaring hymn. The walls are draped in moss so thick it feels like velvet, and the pool below is impossibly clear, reflecting the ferns that lean over its edge. This was a place of pure, elemental refreshment, where the Oread could commune with the very essence of flowing water as it carved its way through her stone domain. Then there were the high meadows, those sudden, sun-drenched clearings that appear like miracles above the tree line. Here, in spring and summer, the air hums with life, thick with the scent of wild thyme and blooming asphodel. This was the Oread's dancing floor, her open-air hall where she could bask in the sun's warmth and watch the clouds drift past. And always there were the sacred springs where fresh, cold water bubbled up directly from the heart of the mountain. These were not just sources of drink, they were fonts of life, places of healing and prophecy, where the Oread's power to nurture and sustain was most directly felt. Each of these sanctuaries, from the deepest cave to the highest meadow, shared one defining quality, a pristine, untouched wildness. They were places where the raw hand of nature remained unaltered, perfect manifestations of the Oread's own soul. To stumble upon one was to enter a sacred space, a reminder that the mountain's true treasures were not gold or jewels, but these pockets of silent, breathing beauty. This dual nature is the very heart of their mystery. An Oread could be the kindest spirit a lost traveler might ever encounter. Picture a shepherd separated from his flock in a sudden, dense mountain fog. Disoriented and chilled, he stumbles through the gray, his calls swallowed by the mist. Then a gap appears in the swirling vapor, revealing a narrow, sunlit path he had never noticed before. This was no accident. It was the gentle guidance of the mountain's guardian, leading him back to safety without ever showing her face. Or a weary traveler, parched after a long climb, might find a previously hidden spring, its water impossibly cool and sweet, bubbling up right where he needed it most. These were not random acts of nature, but the deliberate blessings of a spirit who cared for those who respected her home. Their laughter could sound like the gentle ringing of stones in a stream, a sign of a contented and welcoming presence. Yet this same spirit held a terrifying capacity for vengeance. To disrespect her domain was to awaken the mountain's fury itself. A hunter who carelessly polluted a sacred spring with blood, or a woodsman who arrogantly carved his name into an ancient, venerated rock face, would soon learn the price of such hubris. The Oread's wrath was as elemental as her kindness. She might shatter the stillness with a sudden, ear-splitting crack of falling rock, starting a landslide that narrowly missed the offender as a final warning. If the disrespect continued, that next rumble would not be a warning but a cataclysm, burying the fool under the very stone he had defiled. There was no court of appeal, no pleading one's case. The mountain's judgment was immediate and absolute. This was not mere cruelty. It was the fundamental law of the wild. The Oread embodied the mountain's two inseparable truths, the life-giving water from its springs and the deadly avalanche from its heights. To receive her grace, one had to move through her world with humility, understanding that every cliff and stream was not a resource to be used, but a living entity to be honored. This profound bond meant every mountain feature had its own distinct personality. A gentle, sun-drenched slope where wildflowers bloomed and sheep could graze safely was not just a peaceful place, it was the domain of a benevolent Oread. Her presence was felt in the warm breeze, her voice a soft rustle in the grass, her nature as welcoming and nurturing as the land itself. She was the spirit of that specific, kindly part of the mountain. But a sheer, crumbling cliff face, a place of treacherous footing and sudden drops, was the territory of a very different kind of nymph. Her demeanor was as sharp and unforgiving as the jagged rocks, her watchful eyes as cold as the shadowed granite. She was not evil any more than the cliff itself is evil. She was simply a perfect embodiment of its inherent danger. This is the core of their role as personifications, the very essence of their being. The Oread did not just live on the mountain, she was its character. Her mood was the mountain's mood. On a calm, clear day, her laughter might ripple through the valleys. But when a storm gathered around the peaks, that was her fury made manifest, her voice the howling wind, her anger the lightning that split the sky. A traveler learned to read the landscape not just for physical clues but for spiritual ones. A cave that echoed with a low, pleasant hum might be a sanctuary. A pass that held an unnerving silence where no bird sang was likely watched by a spirit who valued her solitude and would defend it fiercely. The mountain's entire emotional spectrum, from serene generosity to lethal severity, was mirrored in the soul of its Oread. The silent, watchful presence of the Oreads did not go unanswered by the ancient people who lived in their shadow. Across the rugged highlands of Greece, the evidence of their worship remains etched into the landscape itself, not in grand temples, but in the quiet, humble language of folk religion. You would not find a sprawling marble complex dedicated to a single Oread. Their veneration was far more personal and localized, a relationship built on proximity and necessity. A shepherd guiding his flock through a high pass might pause at a simple pile of stones, carefully stacked by generations of his family. This was an altar, a place to acknowledge the spirit of this particular cliff. A farmer tending vines on a rocky slope might pour a libation of water, wine, or precious milk onto a specific, strangely shaped boulder, knowing it was sacred to the nymph who ensured his terraces did not crumble. These offerings were not extravagant. They were gifts of pure sustenance, things the land itself provided, returned to the spirit of the land. Bunches of wildflowers, small clay jars of honey, the first fruits of a meager harvest, these were the typical gifts. The logic was one of mutual care, a sacred economy. We acknowledge you, Oread, and in return you keep our path safe, our spring flowing, our herds from stumbling. This was the core of their cult, a daily, intimate practice woven into the fabric of rural life. It was a religion of the hearth scaled up to the mountain, a constant, quiet conversation with the powerful, temperamental entity who was your closest neighbor. Their altars were not destinations for pilgrimage, but waypoints in a life lived within the Oread's domain, a constant reminder that every step taken on the mountain was a step through her home. Their silent watch over the mountains found a vibrant voice in the hands of ancient artists. On the curved surfaces of Greek vases, the Oreads come to life, forever captured in moments of dynamic interaction with their home. You might see one leaning gracefully against a towering rock, her form echoing the slope of the stone itself. Or perhaps she is shown in mid-motion, filling her water jug from a sacred spring that flows directly from a painted mountainside. These figures are never stiff or formal. They are depicted in flowing, clinging drapery that seems to ripple with the same wind that stirs the leaves of the painted trees. Their poses are natural and relaxed, often leaning or sitting upon the very landscape they embody. This was a deliberate artistic choice, a visual language that communicated their inseparable bond with the wild. They are not visitors to the scene, they are the scene, their bodies an extension of the earth. Their common attributes are simple but telling, a water jug for the life-giving springs, or sometimes a branch of pine or fir, the hardy trees that cling to the high slopes. They are almost always beautiful, with serene faces and flowing hair, a vision of the wilderness not as a threatening chaos, but as a realm of graceful, natural order. These pottery scenes were the popular media of their day, spreading and standardizing the image of the Oread as a lithe, benevolent, and integral part of the mountain's soul. This artistic tradition did not fade with Greece. The Romans, who deeply admired Greek culture, created countless marble copies of lost Greek bronze statues. It is through these Roman works that we often get our clearest glimpse of the classical Oread. A surviving statue might show a nymph turning quickly, her drapery whipped by a sudden mountain gust, a look of alert curiosity on her face. Another might capture her in a moment of repose, seated on a rocky outcropping carved directly into the statue's base. Here, the art does more than depict, it embodies. The cool, smooth marble of her skin contrasts with the rough, textured stone she rests upon, a perfect metaphor for the Oread herself, the beautiful spirit born from the rugged earth. In the frescoes of Roman villas, they appear in lush, idealized landscapes, bringing a touch of wild, divine nature into the heart of domestic luxury. Through these interconnected artistic traditions, a consistent image was forged and passed down through centuries. The Oread was forever fixed in the cultural imagination as the living soul of the landscape, a graceful and eternal bridge between the raw power of the mountain and the human appreciation for its beauty. As Roman legions marched and their culture absorbed the world around them, the Oreads too found a new home. They crossed into Roman mythology as the Oreads, their Greek name Latinized but their fundamental essence preserved. The Romans, a deeply practical people, saw in these mountain spirits a familiar, necessary power. They did not reinvent the Oreads. Instead, they adopted them wholeheartedly, recognizing in these nymphs a divine force that mirrored their own reverence for the noumena, the sacred spirits inhabiting every facet of the natural world. A Roman traveler ascending a pass in the Apennines would feel the same watchful presence as his Greek counterpart in the Peloponnese. He would offer a similar, quiet prayer to the Oreads of that particular slope, a small libation poured onto the stone to ensure a safe journey. This was not a case of slavish copying, but of a shared, primal understanding that certain places were alive with consciousness. The core identity of the Oreads remained unshaken. They were still the beautiful, powerful, and sometimes dangerous personifications of the high places. Their dual nature as both benevolent guides and avenging spirits translated perfectly into the Roman worldview, where respecting local deities was not just piety but a matter of survival. Yet within this continuity, subtle shifts in emphasis began to appear, reflecting the distinct character of Roman culture. The Romans were master engineers and administrators, and their relationship with the land was often one of order and utility. While they fully acknowledged the wild power of the Oreads, their myths and art sometimes portrayed these nymphs with a slightly more domesticated, or at least more integrated, presence within the settled landscape. The raw, ecstatic frenzy of the Dionysian Maenads, so central to some Greek tales, found less prominence in Roman tellings. Instead, the Oreads were often depicted in more peaceful, pastoral roles. They were shown as nurturers of mountain flocks or as serene figures inhabiting the villas and gardens of the wealthy, their wildness aestheticized into a symbol of rustic charm. Think of the exquisite frescoes in Pompeii where nymphs dance in idyllic wooded settings. These are not the terrifying participants in sparagmos, but beautiful elements of a perfected nature. This reflects a Roman tendency to appreciate the wild from a position of control, to bring the symbol of the mountain into the home as a decoration. It was not a denial of the Oreads' power, but a reframing of it to suit a culture that built vast, ordered empires and saw the untamed world as something to be managed even as they respected it. Perhaps the most telling Roman adaptation lies in the story of Echo, the most famous of all Oreads. The Roman poet Ovid, in his monumental work The Metamorphoses, took her Greek tale and crafted it into a masterpiece of pathos and psychological insight. It is through Ovid's Roman lens that Echo's story reached its most polished and influential form. He sharpened the narrative, focusing intensely on the themes of unrequited love and personal transformation with a literary flair that would resonate for centuries. While the core tragedy remained identical, Ovid's masterful storytelling, written for a sophisticated Roman audience, embedded Echo and Narcissus permanently into the Western imagination. In this way, the Romans became the primary curators and transmitters of the Oreads' legends. They took the raw, localistic myths of the Greek highlands and polished them into universal stories, ensuring that the whisper of the mountain nymph would echo not just through the crags of Greece, but through the literature and art of the entire Western world, long after the last libation was poured on a pagan stone. The mountains did not fall silent when the last pagan prayers faded. The Oreads simply slipped into a new form, reborn in the ink of poets. The Renaissance, with its fervent rediscovery of classical texts, eagerly embraced these spirits of the wild. They became elegant symbols of a lost golden age, figures of mythic beauty who populated the idealized landscapes of pastoral poetry and painting. Yet it was in the turbulent heart of the Romantic period, centuries later, that the Oreads found their truest modern voice. For the Romantics, nature was not a pretty backdrop. It was a sublime and terrifying force, a direct conduit to the divine. And in the Oread, they found a perfect emblem for this raw, untamable power. Poets like John Keats did not merely reference these nymphs, they channeled their very essence. In his epic fragment, Hyperion, the fallen titan Saturn calls out not to gods, but to the wild spirits of the earth itself. Keats gives us a haunting vision of the natural world in mourning, where the very mountains and forests grieve through their nymphs. He writes of fair nymphs who, all the gentle summer day, beside the waterfalls of fountains, danced. This is not a decorative image. It is a profound statement that the soul of the landscape is a conscious, feeling entity, one that suffers and celebrates with the turning of the cosmic wheel. Keats uses the Oreads to express a world sorrow, a deep, ecological empathy long before the word existed. Percy Bysshe Shelley, in his masterpiece Prometheus Unbound, takes this fusion even further. For Shelley, the Oreads and their sister nymphs become the very voices of revolutionary hope and cosmic regeneration. When the tyrant Jupiter is overthrown and Prometheus is freed, the entire earth erupts in a symphony of joy sung by these elemental spirits. The Oreads become the voice of the mountains themselves, singing of a newfound freedom. Shelley is not just describing a pretty scene, he is arguing that the liberation of humanity is inextricably linked to the liberation of the natural world, and it is the ancient spirits of that world who announce the new dawn. This was a radical repurposing of myth. The Oread was no longer just a local deity to be appeased, she was transformed into a symbol of the sublime, a representation of nature's awesome, terrifying, and ultimately beautiful power that dwarfed human ambition. Can you hear the shift? The Roman villas are gone. In their place is the storm-racked peak of Mont Blanc, the wild English Lake District, the raw, emotive force that the Romantics worshipped. The Oread became the literary vessel for humanity's awe in the face of that overwhelming, untamable grandeur. Perhaps the most enduring power of these myths is how they map the wilderness within us. The Oreads are more than just relics of ancient belief. They are powerful archetypes, symbols of the wild, untamed territories of our own subconscious minds. Each of us carries our own inner mountain range, peaks of ambition and deep ravines of instinct. The Oread is the spirit of that rugged, internal landscape. She represents the part of us that resists domestication, the primal core that remains fiercely independent, intuitive, and deeply connected to the rhythms of the earth itself. Think of that sudden, inexplicable urge to walk in the woods, to stand on a cliff and feel the wind, to simply be silent in a wild place. That is your inner Oread calling, a deep, ancestral pull toward the untamed. Her benevolence mirrors our own capacity for sudden insight and guidance that seems to come from a place beyond rational thought. Yet her vengeful fury is equally a part of us. It is the righteous anger we feel when our deepest values are violated, the internal landslide that buries old patterns when we have been profoundly disrespected. This is not a destructive force, but a protective one, a necessary eruption that clears the way for a new, more authentic self to emerge. The tragic story of Echo becomes a profound metaphor for the parts of our psyche we have lost the ability to express. Her curse is the feeling of being unable to speak your truth, trapped only repeating the expectations and words of others until your own identity feels like it is fading away. And the transformation of Britomart into a goddess is the ultimate symbol of psychological integration, the process of taking a profound trauma or pursuit and, through a leap of faith, transforming it into a source of newfound strength and purpose. In this light, the ancient Greeks were not just describing the world around them, they were charting the vast, often frightening, and beautiful wilderness of the human soul. Their myths provide a language for the parts of ourselves that are too deep, too wild, and too powerful for ordinary words. That ancient whisper of a living mountain now feels more urgent than ever. Our modern environmental crises, from strip mining to deforestation, stem from a fundamental disconnect, a view of nature as a dead resource to be exploited. The Oreads offer a radical corrective to this mindset. They personify a worldview where the mountain is not an it, but a thou, a conscious being with its own rights, moods, and sacred integrity. This is not mere primitive superstition. It is a profound ecological wisdom we are desperately trying to relearn. Think of a modern conservationist fighting to protect a watershed. Her argument is not so different from the logic of an ancient Greek making an offering at a sacred spring. Both actions are rooted in the understanding that the health of the mountain directly determines the health of the community downstream. The Oread was the symbol of that interdependence. Her wrath at a polluted spring was the mythic expression of a very real, tangible consequence: poisoned water and a broken ecosystem. Today, we see the literal manifestation of that Oreadian vengeance in the landslides that follow clear cutting, the silent, snowless peaks that result from a warming climate. These are not punishments from a vengeful spirit, but they are the direct, predictable results of failing to respect the mountain as a living, breathing system. The Oread myth forces us to ask a critical question. Do we see a forest as a collection of bored feet of lumber, or as the verdant hair of a living entity? Is a mountain valley a site for a waste dump, or the sacred grove of a local spirit? Reframing our perspective through this ancient lens does not require literal belief, but it demands a shift in ethics. It asks us to replace arrogance with humility and to see ourselves not as masters of the landscape, but as temporary guests within it. The Oreads remind us that true conservation begins not with policy alone, but with a feeling in the heart, that deep, instinctual reverence for the wild soul of the world. But this beautiful confusion has a clear logic if you know where to look. The key to telling an Oread from her countless sister spirits lies not in their appearance, but in the very ground beneath their feet. An Oread is defined by her domain, the high, rugged, and enduring world of stone. Her spirit is anchored to a mountain peak, a deep ravine, or a vast expanse of rocky wilderness. She is the soul of the cliff face, the consciousness of the granite summit. Her presence feels ancient, solid, and formidable. Now contrast this with a dryad. A dryad is a being of the forest, but her connection is intensely personal and alarmingly fragile. She is not tied to the whole woodland, but to a single, specific tree. Her life force is interwoven with its roots, its bark, its very sap. If her tree is cut down or dies, the dryad tied to it perishes alongside it. Her existence is one of delicate, terrifying interdependence. While an Oread embodies the timeless mass of a mountain, a dryad represents the vulnerable, individual life of the forest. Their domains create entirely different personalities. An Oread, ruling over a vast and often solitary realm, carries an air of majestic independence. A dryad, living in a dense community of trees and other nymphs, is often more social, her spirit reflecting the interconnected, whispering world of the woods. Then there are the naiads, the freshwater nymphs. Their world is one of constant motion and sound. A naiad is the spirit of a specific body of fresh water, a babbling brook, a quiet pond, or a rushing river. She cannot stray far from her water source, for her life is sustained by its flow. Her mood can shift as quickly as the current, from a placid, reflective stillness to a raging, flood-driven fury. Think of the sensory differences. You find an Oread by listening for the deep silence of a high cave or the wind whistling over a bare rock. You find a naiad by the constant music of moving water, the cool mist rising from a waterfall, the damp smell of moss and wet stone by a stream bank. One is the spirit of enduring, silent stone. The other is the spirit of life-giving, ever-changing water. Their gifts reflect this. An Oread might guide you to solid ground or shelter in a storm. A naiad might offer a drink from her spring, water that could heal or even grant prophecy. So the next time you walk through a wild place, look around. Are you standing on a sun-warmed slab of ancient rock, feeling a watchful presence from the heights? You are in the realm of an Oread. Are you surrounded by the gentle rustle of leaves with the sense that a specific ancient oak holds a secret life? A dryad is near. Are you resting by a stream, lulled by its endless song? You are a guest of a naiad. Each spirit is a perfect expression of her home, a unique voice in the earth's grand, living chorus. Their timeless presence now echoes through the glowing screens of our modern myths. These ancient spirits of the stone have found a vibrant new life in the realms of fantasy, where game designers and authors have eagerly adopted and reshaped them for a contemporary audience. In the sprawling digital world of the Elder Scrolls series, the player can encounter majestic and reclusive mountain spirits who guard the highest peaks, direct descendants of the Oreads archetype. They are not mere set dressing, but powerful entities with their own lore and quests, demanding respect from any hero who dares to climb their sacred domains. This mirrors the ancient relationship perfectly, translating the need for reverence into a game mechanic. The world of Genshin Impact is filled with elemental beings, and its geo-spirits, born of the earth and rock, channel the Oreads' essence as guardians of cliffs and stone forests. They are the literal soul of the landscape given form, their power drawn directly from the mountain's heart. This modern interpretation captures the primal connection the Greeks understood so well, that a place and its spirit are one and the same. Beyond gaming, fantasy literature has woven these nymphs into its very fabric. In Rick Riordan's popular Percy Jackson series, which revitalized Greek mythology for a new generation, the Oreads appear in their classic form, beautiful and powerful spirits interacting directly with modern-day demigods. Riordan's portrayal is remarkably faithful, preserving their role as local manifestations of the wild, their personalities shifting with the nature of their specific mountain home. This reintroduces the ancient concept to young readers in an accessible, exciting context. Other authors take more creative license, using the Oread as a springboard for entirely new creations. A novel might feature a race of stoic, long-lived mountain folk whose skin has the texture of granite and whose voices sound like shifting scree, a clear homage to the Oreads' fusion of human and elemental traits. These modern Oreads often retain their classic duality, capable of offering shelter to lost travelers or triggering avalanches against those who defile their home, proving that their core nature, the balance of grace and fury, remains a compelling character trait. Why does this ancient figure resonate so powerfully today? Perhaps in our increasingly digital and controlled world, we crave a connection to that raw, untamable wildness. The Oread represents a nature that is not a passive resource, but an active, conscious participant in the story. She gives a face and a voice to the environmental forces we are now struggling to understand and protect. Her journey from a local spirit worshipped at a simple stone altar to a global archetype in a blockbuster video game is a testament to the enduring power of these myths. They are not dead stories, but living ideas, constantly reborn to help us navigate our relationship with the wild world and with the untamed peaks within ourselves. Beyond the famous peaks and epic tales lived countless other Oreads, their stories woven into the local soil of forgotten cliffs and humble hills. These lesser-known spirits reveal a mythology that was deeply personal and profoundly local, a divine presence in every valley. Take Pitys, for instance, an Oread whose story is one of quiet devotion and transformation. She was a companion of the god Pan, but she fled his romantic advances much like her sister nymphs. In her desperate flight, she prayed to the mountain itself for protection. The earth heard her plea, and as Pan reached for her, she was transformed into a pine tree. From that moment, Pitys became the spirit of the pine, her rustling needles forever sighing with the wind that was Pan's eternal breath. Her story was not a grand tragedy played out for kings, but a local explanation for the very sound of the wind in the high forests, a whisper of resistance and sanctuary. Then there was the Oreads, a prophetess among nymphs who inhabited the rugged peaks of the Pindus Mountains. She was renowned for her divine wisdom, a seer who could interpret the whispers of the stone and the signs carried on the high air. Unlike the grand oracles of Delphi, her counsel was for the local shepherds and villagers, guiding them to lost goats or warning of coming storms. Her name itself means safety, a direct reflection of her role as a local protectress. Her myth is small, almost intimate, yet it perfectly captures how communities personalize the divine, creating an Oread whose sole purpose was the well-being of those who lived in her shadow. In the wilds of Arcadia, a region thick with myth, the Oread was said to have given her name to a great city after she was seduced by the god Poseidon. Her story blurs the line between nymph and founding mother, suggesting that the very identity of a place could spring from the union of a local spirit and a powerful god. These local myths were not recorded in grand epics but survived in the folklore of the people, the tales told by firelight to explain why a certain spring never ran dry or why a particular rock formation felt so strangely watchful. They remind us that for every Oread known across Greece, there were hundreds, perhaps thousands, known only to the people who lived on their slopes, each one a unique and vital thread in the vast, shimmering tapestry of the living mountain. From the silent, watchful presence on a high peak to the tragic echo in a deep ravine, the Oreads have guided us through a world where every mountain breathed. We have met them as the firstborn children of the earth herself, as the stern guardians who could bless or bury a traveler, and as the eternal companions of gods like Artemis and Pan. We have felt the heartbreak of Echo and witnessed the desperate transformation of Britomartis. These spirits are far more than simple nymphs. They are the vibrant, conscious soul of the wilderness, embodying the mountain's dual nature of generous life and unforgiving power. Their legacy is a river that flows unbroken from the stone altars of ancient shepherds to the glowing screens of modern fantasy, proving that our need to personify and honor the wild is a timeless human impulse. They remind us that the true mystery is not whether these spirits exist, but that we have always felt they must. The world feels richer, more alive when we listen for that whisper in the wind. Now we pass the voice to you. Which of these mountain spirits resonated most deeply with your own experience of the wild? Or perhaps another nature spirit calls to you, a dryad of the ancient woods or a naiad of a rushing stream? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation with the living earth.